I just want to thank each and every one of you for coming out, the media, the heads of unions, and all of you panelists, and the moderator.
In 1993, we had the formation of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados.
We are discussing CTUSAB and its role in national development, and we all know what or who CTUSAB is. CTUSAB stands for Congress of Trade Union and Staff Associations of Barbados, and it is responsible for bringing trade unions and staff associations in Barbados together to represent the rights and the interests of workers.
Trade Union of Staff Associations of Barbados is a mixture of trade unions and staff associations, the police, the fire service, and the prison officers. By statute, we're not allowed to form unions, and although there has been some movement on the interpretation of the legislation, they still align themselves to the Congress as staff associations. That body has been undergoing some stresses and some strain. There's a perception that it will soon stop performing and go into deforming.
CTUSAB is in a contrasting environment. At one hand, it is a creature of affiliates, independent trade unions, 𝘚𝘬𝘭𝘪𝑑𝓐𝑗, nurses, and so on. But once CTUSAB is created, it is the advocate for those organizations. So it's a contradictory role, as it were. And anything CTUSAB does to affect national policy and to enhance development will be subject to policies that it initiates on the strength of approval by its affiliates. And CTUSAB, as it were, is not an operational trade union like the BW or 𝘚𝘬𝘭𝘪𝑑𝓐𝑗. CTUSAB I would define as an organization of unions registered as a trade union under the law, but at the same time not directly engaged in collective bargaining. Because in order for a union to be effective, it must have two characteristics. One, it must be registered, and two, it must be able to bargain collectively. Recognized by the employer and to bargain collectively. Those three criteria.
Communication is going to be very important, so I envisage an active communication, active social media presence. Did you knows, polls. I'm also envisioning app of sorts. I'm also envisioning the integration of legal minds into the CTUSAB and the other unions, that you can have almost like a lawyer on call if some person needs advice, that you open access to the different chatbots and things like that, that you can actually get general questions answered, and we can keep a log. And again, all of that is in collecting data and seeing what the needs of our people are, and having the information there so that we can resort to.
If we're talking about the relevance of CTUSAB and therefore what it can contribute to development, because it can only contribute to development if it is relevant, there need to be ways for this umbrella organization to resonate with younger people and the members of the various unions that form part of CTUSAB. And I think that, yes, the PR, etc., is part of it, but I think there has to be something that holds these entities together, some kind of glue beyond the historical legacy.
Hey, listen up, listen up. Listen up. National Trade Union Center, working for the good of all. National Trade Union Center, go where you know we got control. We working with.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to read citations for each person on the panel and Dr. 𝘚𝘬𝘭𝘧 Alleyne. Okay? So I start with Dr. 𝘚𝘬𝘭𝘧 Alleyne, moderator. Dr. 𝘚𝘬𝘭𝘧 Alleyne is a veteran trade unionist. He is known for his unwavering commitment and dedication to the work of the labor movement. Dr. Alleyne is a member of the National Union of Public Workers and was previously employed as the Assistant General Secretary of that organization. Apart from being an active trade unionist, he is a social commentator. He is also well known for his research paper. As an educator, Dr. Alleyne has worked as a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. As a public officer, he served in the office of Director of Urban Development Commission. Dr. Alleyne is currently a member of the CTUSAB's Eminent Persons Group and the Education and Training Committee. He is also the appointed CTUSAB representative on the Board of Management of the Queen's College School. Okay. Dr. Kristina Hinds is a senior lecturer in political science and head of the Department of Government Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. She holds a PhD in International Relations and an MA in International Relations, University of Kent, a PG in Diploma in University Teaching and Learning at the University of the West Indies, and a Bachelor's in Industrial Development Studies, St. Mary's University. She has published the book, Civil Society Organization, Governance, and the Caribbean Community, journal articles, and book chapters on a variety of topics related to Caribbean governance and international relations or political economy. Since 2015, Dr. Hinds has served extensively within the International Studies Association. She worked as the Caribbean Studies Association Program Chair between 2019 and 2021 and currently serves on its executive committee. In April 2022, Dr. Hinds was sworn into the Senate of Barbados as the independent senator. Dr. Hinds is the host of Down to Brass Tacks, a current affairs radio show aired on 𝘊𝘢𝘵 790 FM. Has contributed newspaper columns and social and political analyses for media across the Caribbean. As a sportsperson, she has represented Barbados as a national field hockey goalkeeper, served as the female vice president of the Barbados Hockey Federation 2016 to 2018, and in advisory and executive positions for other local non-governmental organizations. That's Dr. Hinds. Kathleen Brathwaite, nurse consultant, executive self-care coach, author, advocate for workplace wellness. With over 22 years in healthcare, Kathleen Brathwaite has dedicated her career to empowering professionals to align with their strengths and passions. As a nurse consultant and executive self-care coach, she advocates for workplace wellness, professional growth, and sustainable self-care practices, especially for those in demanding service fields. Kathleen has observed how unions have traditionally focused on reactive engagement, stepping in during disputes, wage negotiations, or workplace conflict. However, she envisions a future where unions evolve into proactive architects of workforce development, shaping policies that not only protect workers, but also position them for growth, sustainability, and success in emerging industries. She believes that unions have a critical role to play in policy development, workforce planning, and economic transformation, particularly ensuring that workers are prepared for the blue, green, and digital economies that are essential for long-term national development. While she is continuously learning about union spaces, Kathleen is deeply committed to lending her voice in workplace improvement, professional advocacy, and creating environments where employees can truly thrive. She is honored to be a part of the discussion on CTUSAB's role in national development and looks forward to exploring how unions can become key partners in shaping a resilient, future-ready workforce. Okay, that's Kathleen. Mr. Ellsworth-Young, BJH. Mr. Ellsworth-Young is an employment relations specialist who has had a long, varied, and distinguished career in public service, international organization, and private sector and academia. A former Combermerian, I pause. I know there was going to be a reaction. Yes. And recipient of the Barbados Jubilee Honor in 2016, his public service was completed with the government of Barbados, where he functioned in a number of senior executive capacities, including those of Chief Labor Officer at the Labor Department, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Labor, and the Training Administration Division, and the Division of Youth Affairs and Culture. His international service was rendered at the CARICOM Secretariat, Guyana, where he spent 16 years from 1970 to 1986, raising to the position of Head of Industrial Relations Section. In the private sector, he served as Director of Human Resources with the 𝘚𝘬𝘭𝘬 Group of Companies. A past lecturer in Personnel Management and Industrial Relations at BIMAP and the School of Business at Cave Hill, he was the coordinator of the highly acclaimed Master of Science program in Labor and Employment Relations, UWI Cave Hill, from 2008 to 2015. He holds degrees from the University of the West Indies and the University of Massachusetts, as well as a certificate of social policy from the International Labour Organization, Geneva, Switzerland. A former representative of the a former representative of organized labor on the Employment Rights Tribunal, He is a member of a number of professional entities, namely the Human Resource Association of Barbados, the Labor and Employment Relations Association of the USA, the International Labor and Employment Relations Association, Geneva, Switzerland, and the UK-based Institute of Employment Rights. Mr. Young currently serves as Director of 𝘚𝘦𝘭𝘪𝓷𝓮𝓵𝑉𝑖𝑠, a consulting agency specializing in providing strategic and operational assistance in human resource management and industrial relations with both public and private sectors. He is a member of CTUSAB's Eminent Persons Group. He was formerly the Congress's appointed representative on the Board of Management of St. George Secondary School and is now its representative on the board of the Carseen College. So I just want to present to you your most capable panel.
Good evening, comrades, and if there are any worker that does not consider him or herself a comrade, I'm very sorry. I consider all workers to be comrades. I'm not going to go through the protocols. Good night, Mr. Brathwaite and Mr. Booster and so on. I think we've had enough of that, and I think the hour is catching us, so we need to get going. Welcome, and I hope that this evening's exercise is a kick-off point for the training that is supposed to come. My voice is not going to be very good, so I'm not going to talk very long. I'm just going to move the discussion across my three distinguished panelists. But I want to start by at least setting a tone, and then allow each person to make a contribution 10 to 15 minutes, and then we have a general discussion about the state of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados. Sometime back in 1993, the people of Barbados, led by the trade union movement and in particular the National Union of Public Workers, felt that the government of the day was moving in a direction that would have created strife for the workers, and they reacted in protests across the streets. The protests reached such a high level that it threatened to bring Barbados to a standstill, and quickly the forces of labor, government, and the private sector, after some stalemates, got together and formed representative groups of the two bodies, the employers and the trade unions. So in 1993, we had the formation of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados. Sometime back in my early education and youth and development, they told me that the group would start with storming, norming, forming, performing. And recently I read somewhere I was helping a young lady with exercise, and I said I've added now reforming. And I guess some other bright person will write a chapter on transforming. The idea that you are inging. The trade unions across the globe are under pressure, and Barbados has had its share of confusion at the individual levels and certainly at the grandfather level. Trade Union of Staff Associations of Barbados is a mixture of trade unions and staff associations. The police, fire service, and the prison officers, by statute, were not allowed to form unions. And although there has been some movement on the interpretation of the legislation, they still align themselves to the Congress as staff associations. That body has been undergoing some stresses and some strain. There's a perception that it will soon stop performing and go into deforming. I have some distinguished panelists who have various levels of experiences with trade unions, some practical, some double practical, and some theoretical and so on. I'm going to start with, and I'm going to call everybody comrade. Okay. Everybody comrade. Comrades. Comrade Kathleen Brathwaite, and she's going to start us off. Is the Congress of Trade Union Staff Association of Barbados in a stage of deforming?
All right. I actually covered that a little bit in my presentation, so I can answer that. If I can answer it directly, or do you want me to go ahead and start the presentation? Okay, I'm hoping that it would come up on the screen for you to see. So good afternoon, good evening, sorry, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm always, like I told my president, which is Dr. 𝘚𝘃𝗏𝘬𝘂, I relish at every opportunity to learn and to grow. And this has definitely taken me a little bit out of my comfort, but I am leaning into the discomfort. That is a term that I'm using. Leaning into the discomfort a little bit as I expand my knowledge base. So today we are discussing CTUSAB and its role in national development. And we all know what or who CTUSAB is. CTUSAB stands for Congress of Trade Union and Staff Associations of Barbados, and it is responsible for bringing trade unions and staff associations in Barbados together to represent the rights and the interests of workers. Now, in response to your question, is it deforming? I want you to look at these numbers here that I have sourced. Now, when I was asked to sit on this panel, I wanted definitely statistics about what the role of the union was, how many persons were involved in the unions, what other associations were involved. Getting this information was like pulling teeth, except from UPW. Except from UPW and nursing. Getting this information was like pulling teeth. And you'll see I have here reference 2022. Go back to the slide. Go back to the previous slide. 2022. Now, the reason it is at 2022 is because trying to get information from the Ministry of Labor, they only have statistics to 2022, whereas Statistical Department has to 2024, but some of their information is missing due to the data breach. So I use the information that was complete at the most recent year. We have 124,800 persons employed in Barbados, with 25,200 being in the public sector and 76,100 being in the private sector. Now, out of that number, you notice 5,400 only of persons unionized in UPW. Nursing has a number, registered number on the books now of 4,470 persons, with only 450 persons registered in the BNA. The teaching profession is similar, just over 4,000, and we have 700 in BSTU and 1,600 in BUT. Police has 14 members only out of the large expanse police force. So I want you to look at these numbers. I want you to look at these numbers or listen to these numbers. They told me 14. 1-4. Yeah, they told me 1-4. Huh? 1,400?
Yeah.
Oh, they told me 1-4. All right, so I stand corrected. 1,400 persons. Yeah? And I want us to look at these numbers and think about these numbers. And I want us to ask the question, do these numbers represent a significant part of our workforce? I think the answer is resounding and clear. If it is deforming, I would say it is at the point where it needs to pivot. I will not go into that conversation to say that it's deforming. We are in a great space where we need to pivot the working space. Now, from having conversations with persons, three general points came up as it relates to the climate and perception of unions. Persons don't really trust the unions. They don't believe that the unions does anything for them. Some people did say that when you have an issue, sometimes you get some resolution and what's not. There is a perception that it is a very archaic leadership model, and the traditional model of confrontation generally and no longer works for this modern workforce. So how can we remain relevant? I think that is the question that is on the table today. And what I want us to understand is that it can't be business as usual. Now, when I came here, I came with exuberance and excitement, and I thought I would have seen a lot more persons, but the faces, some of the faces I've seen as I have come up through nursing, and the faces remain the same. So, what I am proposing is transforming that traditional representation to a more visionary transformation. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that the unions have not achieved anything in Barbados? No, that is not what I'm saying. Am I saying that the efforts in wage negotiations, health and safety, those other areas have not been a pivotal foundation for unionism? I am not saying that. I am actually happy. I am beneficiary to those policies. I'm beneficiary to those advocacies and what's not. But what I am proposing as a young person working, that it needs to move past that now, and almost like a position of an architect. Everybody knows what an architect is, right? So the architect does not just wait till the building collapses. So it shouldn't just be a space where it's just responding to injustices. Am I saying, and I want us to get this clear, don't mix up my words, don't mix my words. Am I saying that the union is not there injecting and influencing and advocating? I saw Brother Comrade, there's a name, 𝘠𝘬𝘭𝘧, in his commentation on YouTube the other day when he was speaking about the budget, how he had injected or suggested some areas of improvement within the workforce, and he was a little bit disappointed in the areas not being acknowledged or things made about them. I'm actually speaking about revolutionizing or evolving from just being what persons perceive as defenders of labor to being architects of future work. Now, what does that look like? It looks like understanding that we are trying to aim for the different areas in the Sustainable Development Goals. So we need to have persons in place, and I was happy to hear the gentleman that spoke, Saul, spoke about champions and having this commitment to partner with CTUSAB in terms of education. So having a market analysis of the sectors that are coming on stream. So the green economy, the blue economy, the care economy. What does the market analysis of those sectors look like? What are the skill gaps that our workers are need to be upskilled in? And when they need to be upskilled, is it a smooth transition? Is it a just transition? And we're lobbying for those just transitions. Assessing environmental impacts of the new industries and being very vocal and front on what those industries are. Fostering training opportunities, and we heard from Mr. Saul how we have started to foster that training opportunity. You know, the only thing I would commit to that and say is I love the idea of the education. I love the idea of the provision of workshops. However, I think that we've missed a very crucial step, and that crucial step is gaining the interest. Putting CTUSAB forward, front as the knowledge hub, as the advocators, as the champions, as the leaders, as the drivers of what what future workforce looks like. You heard me speak about champion workforce and upskilling. So yes, we're going to advocate for training programs in different AI and green energy and digital economies, the care economies. Yes, partner with governments. Those are things that we've actually been doing. But as it relates to front-facing, Do we recognize that all of us have general skills that we can top up in order to meet the criterion of the sectors coming in to play? Do we recognize that? I know when people hear about these new sectors coming in, we all get this fear about, oh my gosh, am I equipped? Is AI going to take it? I would love to see CTUSAB you can go to the slide with the example of skill acquisition. Take the lead in terms of communication. And I just put this example here. I didn't have enough time to create, not this one, slide 10. I didn't have enough time to create an actual social media post. But what I did here in terms of this skill, this is information that can get out. If you've ever grown or planted or managed a garden, we can reframe that and say, hey, you have basic level skills, and we can transfer that, or we can offer you a course, or we can equip you to recognize that that is a step in the way of sustainable agriculture. Similar, do you know how to recycle or reduce waste? That's the circular economy, things like that. Do you know how to fix things like ACs and plumbing? Now, the advanced skills obviously is solar panel installation, eco-friendly construction, and data skills for climate monitoring based on those 3 skills that I mentioned. But if we can position ourselves via the social media, and I have that as one of my points in terms of communication, if we can position ourselves as the knowledge hub to break that fear barrier, to switch the mindset of those persons, hey, I may not be equipped, I'm operating from fear, I'm going to be out of a job, then I envision that persons then are more receptive to what I guess the union has to offer, and it breaks that mindset from the traditional, I only see in the union when I am in problems or I am in trouble. I hope y'all understand what I'm trying to say. And then another area we fall short in, data analysis, data collection, data research. From that short exercise of me trying to find information, we recognize that that seems to be a major problem still, and if the union can get a front of that, if we can engage the University of the West Indies, use some of their students, probably some, I don't even want to say job attachment, but internship of sorts, to let their specialists to come in and help gather this data, create the frameworks, so that we can actually have data running. We can understand what these emerging sectors are using, the various tools. And then we can also, when we position our points to government and we sit in those social partnership spaces, then our agitation, our contributions are more concrete and sound because it's backed and more credible by data. And enhancing communication in public. This is one thing that I will encourage the unions to really go ahead at. This is 2025, and with all due respect, everybody, we know, a lot of us are educators in here, and we know that the attention span is not the best. Nobody is saying, no listening to no 45-minute podcast, conversation with the world of superfluosities. That's the word? Who's the person?
Good enough.
Right, good. And loquaciousness, nobody is listening to that. So, modernize our message. Have the information out there, just like the slide I showed you before. Translating the tools that we have now, the things that we have inside. Show persons, hey, you have the baseline. This is where we want to get, and these are the skills that you need to, and this is where you need to find these skills. I love that integration with NTI, by the way, and I think that was one of my points as well. Raise awareness about sustainable development. Engage younger generations of workers. I would love to come to a union meeting and see and hear filled with youth. It means that the legacy is going to continue. It means that the information is going to be transferred, and that is where we need to pay a lot of attention and focus. Transferring all of this information and knowledge from Brother Comrade 𝘞𝘲𝘊𝘅𝘍𝑒𝐻, Comrade Ellsworth, Comrade Derek, President, transferring that information throughout the system to younger persons to carry on, and being able to mentor them over a period of time. build support for union initiatives. And again, the communication is going to be the most vital aspect because, like I said, whether we accept it or not, persons only recognize the unions when there is a problem. That I would like to see change. And then I have been researching this untapped market, which I unfortunately fall into, the gig economy market. So this would include people, the freelancers, the consultants, the coaches, those online workers that really don't have any support as it relates to workers' representation and workers' right. And yes, it's a little bit non-traditional, but we have to recognize that this is where a lot of the workforce is going into entrepreneurship. And I think that the unions, if we can get together with an insurance company and we can have conversations, we can really sit and put our heads to the table and create a package that is sufficiently beneficial enough for this untapped market. I think that could gain some really great strides for the union as well. So I'm soon wrapping up, but I have 6 pillars with which I had envisioned. So workplace wellness as a right and what it looks like. So it looks like championing the well-being of other workers. This is especially passionate to me, and it aligns in terms of the care economy because as a nurse, we are often heard as the backbone of the healthcare system. We are often heard about pardon? Oh. We are often told that your health is your wealth, and I think that there needs to be significant investment and conversations and agitation going forward. In my research as well, I also saw that there is a policy workplace wellness, and while it is a policy, and we usually sit at the table once these things are finished and I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong, sit at the table while these things are finished to give our input and agitation or whatever there. I want us to be able to lead from the front. So creating wellness audits, see what wellness in the workplace looks like, help the workplace. So it's not really that the union is coming in and sitting in when there is a fallout, but essentially sitting and building and growing as these things are built out at the table and not when they're finished for us to review. Note, while I'm saying this, it would mean that the union then has to engage in upskilling its own members, bringing a lot more persons in and upskilling those persons or those specialists in those areas so that we can have experts to really inform what these different areas or pillars that I'm suggesting. I was happy to hear about the course about shop stewards, so that was one of my second pillars. In order for the shop steward and other representatives to act as mediators and facilitators. Over the years, the shop stewards, we've had several complaints about shop stewards and what's not, but putting or injecting some energy into the training of them in terms of mediation and facilitation, and it's not just an aggressive agitation, oh, I'm going to call the shop steward because you unfair me, and then it's this whole breakdown, lay down something. Then we have upskilling future readiness, So then I had shift, but then I said add, because I don't want the takeaway to be that we're not eroding the things that the union have been successful at before. So you're adding negotiation portfolio to the negotiation portfolios, career development and industry adaptation. So a lot about mindset shift, a lot about increasing your toolkit, your skill toolkit. Those are the things that I am suggesting that we should engage in. And I also said the implementation looks like work skilling hubs for digital AI, green job training, those kind of things. As I was going over this morning, I came up with the idea of the union having a summer camp of sorts and tailoring to young persons interested in the actual, the different sustainable development goals that we're trying to achieve, those fields, and see if we can begin with those teenagers and trying to shift the mindset, or even not only teenagers, but persons who may be unemployed that may have a particular skill set and looking to improve what they are doing. And then integrated social protection, social safety nets beyond data. That one was a bit ticklish for me because I could not find the evidence I wanted to support this. The most I could, the social safety nets. Now we know we have NIS, and I guess this is where an economist can lend suggestions. We know we have NIS, we know the state of NIS, we know that there are going to be challenges, we know there is insurance and all those other things, but this is where we need to really put our heads to the plow to see if we can come up with other safety nets to ensure that our workers really have that financial support should anything happen. And then digital transformation and use of digital platforms. Remember I said communication is going to be very important. So I envisage an active communication, active social media presence. Did you knows, polls. I'm also envisioning an app of sorts. I'm also envisioning the integration of legal minds into the CTUSAB and the other unions, that you can have almost like a lawyer on call if some person needs advice, that you open access to the different chatbots and things like that, that you can actually get general questions answered, and we can keep a log. And again, all of that is in collecting data and seeing what the needs of our people are, having the information there so that we can resort to. Also e-voting. And then there is the co-investment in workforce solutions. So worker-owned enterprises and labor funds. I take a seat back to the economists and the different financial persons that can advise on the best ways for those things, but those are my 6 pillars. Now, again, as I sum up, it is not me advocating or purporting to do away with. It is in addition to those things that have created the foundation for unionism and have been successful in Barbados. So more architectural, more involvement, more front-facing, more filling those gaps for those persons who have the lack of confidence in the union, and more meeting the persons where their needs are. For those of you who are in business, you know, in order for you to set a business, you just don't go out and set a business. You look for where the need is, the pain point is, and you provide a solution. So that is the same approach that I am suggesting. I want to thank you very much for listening to my contribution, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Comrade Brathwaite, and it's a lot of areas flowed from her presentation, and I'm certain that the 2 other panelists will pick up some of this stuff and flesh some of it out, and later on I'll probably throw a few little candles to the light. But we're going to have the veteran among us, the international person, and I didn't add it to his CV, but he was indeed my boss at the living department, and I will give you all a secret. I did learn a lot under Comrade Young. He gave me a lot of freedom to do as I like, and I have always been grateful for that. So Dr. Young, your turn, sir.
In looking at one of the, in teaching industrial relations, I usually put a diagram on the board with a circle in the box. And I ask the students to tell me where the circle is. From the design of the box, the circle can be the top left-hand corner or the center of the box. And those of you who sat in my classes remember that diagram, because the fact that most of us look at things from a perspective. If you send 5 persons to report on the fire, they will come back with different emphases and reports. And as individuals, because we have different personalities, that is why people see religion, love, sex, death penalty from different perspectives. And industrial relations is no different. So therefore, I looked at the topic from a different perspective. Why? Because CTUSAB is in a contrasting environment. At one hand, it is a creature of affiliates, independent trade unions, NDPW, nurses, and so on. But once CTUSAB is created, it is the advocate for those organizations. So it's a contradictory role, as it were. And anything CTUSAB does to affect national policy and to enhance development will be subject to policies that it initiates on the strength of approval by its affiliates. So while there's discretion by the leadership in the Secretariat to do certain things in terms of systemic fundamental change and even representing the affiliates at the level of the social partnership, which we note from observation is kind of up in the air. And I don't want to develop the argument as to why that is so, but the reality is that industrial relations has a political dimension to it. And if you look at trade union history and experience in other parts of the world, what we're going through now in CTUSAB is no different. There was a time when the Congress of Industrial Organizations in the United States left the TUC. Yep. They're probably still out now. And similarly in England. Why? Because trade union leadership see things from different perspectives. And it's going to be difficult for CTUSAB to apply a one-size-fits-all phenomenon in trying to influence public policy or even in the private sector, where we have to acknowledge that the major union in our system has left CTUSAB and has weakened CTUSAB. So what I've done is to paint a kind of historical background, a backdrop to the origins of trade unions, to identify where unions came from, and the fact that prior to 1941, when the BW was established, there were no unions in Barbados.
They were illegal.
But that's right, but trade unions are illegal. Why? Because the actions of trade unions inflict damage on employers by withdrawing labor, and consequently, unions were subject to heavy damages and court suits, lawsuits, for the private employers of the use of the services of union members. So the struggle for political democracy and economic democracy was a tough one. And we only had trade unions legitimized in the 1940s after the policy was established that unions could not be sued for embarking on industrial action in further of their objectives. So we had, since emancipation in 1838, hardly any change in the employer-employee relationship. But in 1937, when the workers of the Caribbean spontaneously rebelled, it wasn't organized, but it's a phenomenon. I was looking just last night at 𝘚𝘪𝓷𝓮𝓵𝑉's The Birth of Labor Movement, which is the only available text on the 1930 rebellions. He was then a member of the Famous Society, a socialist type of organization, which didn't subscribe to straight Marxist-Leninist ideology, but kind of middle of the road, responsible trade unionism, influencing public policy and so on. But he wrote then that, and I urge you, and don't bear with me, but those of you who haven't read the text should read it, because 𝘚𝘪𝓷𝓮𝑵, who was then a university graduate in England, exposed radical ideas. Sometimes many of us don't believe this thing, but he was. And when I read his text again, patiently, I realized what a progressive leader he was. And he observed that there was repression, especially in Barbados and other countries, arising from the leadership style in the plantation system. So I start off by painting a brief sketch to the historical background to the emergence of unions, highlighting the rebellions, the work of the Mourning Commission. And let me digress here and say that I've concluded that CTUSAB's effectiveness as an institution of industrial relations is going to hinge on workers' education. That's the perspective I took. Why? Because many of the older workers have already retired or died, and we have a new generation of employees now coming into the workplace who know nothing about trade union history and perceive, as we found at UB, that they can look after their own needs at the workplace and don't need unions. So CTUSAB is operating in an environment in which its constituents, that is to say, the young people joining affiliates of CTUSAB, perceive that they don't need unions until something happens at the workplace and they need protection. You see? So, unions are an essential part of civil society, and the International Labour Organization believes in strong unions, not omnipotent unions that can overthrow employers and destroy organizations. Because I think to understand the employer-employee relationship, we have to understand the employment relationship. That is to say, the nexus between the employer and the employee, and the tremendous amount of power that employers exercise in the management and the administration of that legal connection between the employer and the employee. Therefore, trade unions and CTUSAB, as it were, is not an operational trade union like the BW or NUPW. CTUSAB I would define as an organization of unions registered as a trade union under the law, but at the same time not directly engaged in collective bargaining. Because in order for a union to be effective, it must have two characteristics. One, it must be registered, and two, it must be able to bargain collectively. Recognized by the employer and to bargain collectively. Those three criteria, right? And consequently, CTUSAB, in my opinion, is hamstrung in terms of achieving higher wages for workers, because that's the responsibility of affiliates. I brought with me a copy of the Constitution of CTUSAB. A lovely document, and it has aims and objectives which answer the question of the role and functions of CTUSAB in the society. If CTUSAB were able, through institutional effectiveness and staffing, we would be here because the organization would have in place a program of activities that are daily implemented by the employees. But that is not so. And when I look at the topic, I ask myself, since CTUSAB is not a typical trade union like the affiliates, how can CTUSAB influence policy and programs in this country of ours? And my conclusion was, it has to get to the heart of employees through interaction with them through the affiliates. Policies instituted by the affiliates which authorize CTUSAB to pursue a certain kind of program. I drew attention to the fact that after rebellions, a number of changes occurred in the Caribbean society, starting with the Barbados Progressive League, and this is important. It is virtually impossible for individuals and trade unions to function unless they understand where the unions came from. You have to know the history. What is the history of cooking, the history of driving, or music, or religion? If you don't understand the history, to me, you're like a chicken running around without a head. So it's imperative for CTUSAB to ensure that the history of trade unionism, since CTUSAB was established in 1993, but even going back, and to work through the affiliates to make sure that each affiliate embarks on a very dynamic worker education program to ensure that the employee union members understand why unions exist, right? What happens if you're not a member of a union? Because you're at the mercy of the power of the employer, if you have no representative, or you depend on the Labour Department and the law to intervene on your behalf. And even that is difficult because there are too many enterprises in Barbados for a department of 25-30 employees to manage, identify unfair labour practices and correct them. If you took a stroll from Bridgetown to Hinds or Silver Sands, or along Bank Hall, or along 𝘚𝘠𝘭𝘪𝘵𝘪𝘐, you have a proliferation of enterprises, right? The likes of which is difficult to manage even internally, far less for the external body, the department or the Ministry of Labour, to ensure that there's compliance with labour standards that the government has established over the last 70 or 80 years. So, So we have a number of landmark developments that we have to be proud of, arising from the disturbances, the formation of the Barbados Progressive League in 1938, and giving rise to the Barbados Workers' Union in 1941, and the Barbados Labour Party in 1944. Important fundamental changes in the landscape, in the history of this country that helped to bring us where we are today. Fast forward now to the 1990s. I won't go over the events in the 1990s that gave rise to CTUSAB, except to note that economic crisis gave rise to protests by the workers against the restrictive and the harsh fiscal policies imposed by the then Barbados government in an effort to curb with declining reserves, declining government revenues, rising prices, and general economic malaise, necessitating recourse to the IMF. So CTUSAB emerged out of protests and economic crisis in the 1990s as a necessary institution to assist government in charting the way forward in the wake of protests against the policies the government had been establishing to cope with the economic crisis that hit us then. And he noted too that the then leader of the Barbados Workers' Union, who led the protest movement, right, became the first president of CTUSAB. But where is he now? The BW is no longer a member of CTUSAB, which has weakened the institution, in my opinion. You see, and the question that I posed when I thought through the issue was, well, it was expediency on his part because he was then leading the protest movement, and it was logical for him to become president of CTUSAB at the time. But you fast forward to years after, he's left CTUSAB, as well as BSTU. Two unions have absconded, as it were, weakening the very sinews of the National Umbrella Organization. And let me digress here to say that the previous General Secretary of the Barbados Workers' Union never believed in a National Umbrella Organization, Sir Frank Walcott, national hero. Because he argued that the Barbados Workers' Union was an amalgam of how many there are? 20-something unions was the logic. And that there was no need for a national umbrella organization, CTUSAB, because the BW was in a sense a national trade union center. In the private sector, that ideology could only hold valid until the public sector unions became recognized and started to agitate for improvement in the working conditions of their members. So we have to look at the issue of CTUSAB's effectiveness in terms of the clientele that CTUSAB services. And I submit that at this juncture of its history, CTUSAB would be advised to be very careful and diplomatic in dealing with private sector issues, lest it be accused by the workers' union of interfering in their constituency. This is where the politics of trade unionism comes into sharp relief. So trade unionism in Barbados has thrived because we've been able to maintain constituencies and areas of interest. The public service unions don't organize workers in the private sector, and only to a limited extent does the BW organize workers in the public sector. And this is a good thing. But that will change.
It has been changing.
That will change. And consequently, the social partnership, which was established in the 1990s and legalized in Parliament, right? And concluded 6 protocols, each of which deals with policy measures and strategies designed to further employment relations. It's almost at a standstill. Because my understanding of a social partnership has a different connotation from one in which you have independent unions that left the family or trade unions, but cannot get invited to the social partnership.
Be able to come.
You see? So a fracture or any dissension within the trade union movement, as we have now, can only be beneficial to one group. Employers, because of the nature of the employment relationship. If unions are weak, then they are incapable of influencing policy and programs and behavior of employers, including government. So in grappling with this topic, reason that CTUSAB, notwithstanding the fact that it is a creature of affiliates, and in a sense is dependent on support, there are still things that the Secretary can do independently to further the objectives of this document here. And if you may go to the realities, please.
Slide.
Yes. I list there when considers the realities of the existence of CTUSAB. And I touched on those before. Next slide. Right. Here I list, based on the realities, some ideas that just occurred to me as a way of breathing new life in the CTUSAB. And I saw CTUSAB as a discrete social partner. So I can't, and even within the firmament, the group of trade unions, we have to draw a distinction between CTUSAB and the NUPW, and the nurses, and the staff associations, each of which is an independent trade union organization or staff association with the authority to do what it considers best for the members. And we've been having some discordant voices within the CTUSAB membership. In fact, I'm told that on the agenda of the NUPW conference is a subject to deal with NUPW's continued membership in CTUSAB. And God forbid, I hope this does not happen, you see. But that suggests to me that there's thinking legitimately too, because there's nothing to stop a leader of an affiliate from perceiving that their union can be most effective outside the framework of CTUSAB. It's perspective, you see. And there's nothing that you can do in CTUSAB to stop an affiliated union from leaving if it so desires. Jamaican Left West Indies Federation, freedom of association gives you the right to disassociate. And this is a fundamental principle of the common law. You can join the church and leave when you feel like. A union can leave CTUSAB or stay in, as the case may be. I argue that CTUSAB needs a strategic plan. In other words, CTUSAB, the other trade unions, can learn from the experiences of private sector organization and put in place measures that are designed to take the organization to a higher level through a set of activities, strategic activities. I repeat, CTUSAB can't go and bargain with the employer. So therefore, it has to concentrate on activities which can sway the affiliates into doing what the leadership in CTUSAB considers to be necessary and appropriate to strengthen the organization's ability to influence the pace of development in this country, both in the private sector and the public sector. It is a hard sell. Back to the other side. Please go back to the other side. Yeah. I call, as my comment here recommended, for a different approach to mass communication. Because even the older people in today's society are into internet technology. So it's not a question, as she correctly said, of reading a lot of lengthy stuff, but nuggets, sound bites that can appear and are digestible by individuals. And as I looked at the literature, I remembered at CARICOM Secretariat dealing with some of these same issues in 1987 and 1970s. Workers' education. Workers' education. Workers will not join unions and subscribe to policies and sacrifice unless they understand why unions exist and what you suffer if you're not a member of a union, right? And the responsibility you have to join, to attend union meetings and contribute and ask questions and make suggestions and so on. That is where the battle will be won, in the hearts and minds of union members. You can come up with the most sophisticated strategic plan. I've seen it. And that happens because the support of the team members is not there to drive, or the managers to drive the document. So next slide. I offer then some ideas that I suggest for the benefit of leadership in CTUSAB. Next slide. Because of the deficiency, implementation deficit within the Secretariat, I'm suggesting that the organization seek to acquire from retirees, and some of us are here, as well as existing union membership, a small team of people of expertise who can assist the organization with the implementation of its work. Otherwise, CTUSAB will be dependent on one or two people to do all the work for them. And I congratulate Mr. 𝘚𝘃𝘖 for what he's been doing single-handedly. But there's no way he can continue that way or be effective in all the areas of industrial relations by himself. So CTUSAB has to be augmented institutionally, what we call institutional strengthening, to enable it to tackle more issues. And it's suggested that a small group be established to advise and provide support to the leadership in the organization. So you notice where I'm leading you to recognize the individualism of the Secretariat from CTUSAB as a political organization. Two different things. One is a body of affiliates, and the other is an institution that is responsible for managing the affairs of the Board of Management on a regular basis. So I suggest a small team of experts to assist the Secretariat with implementation. However, there are things that could be done by the Secretariat to do what they call win the hearts and minds of trade unions through PR. CTUSAB, in my opinion, has to beef up its PR capacity or the message will not get through. And I suggested that a PR expert be part of the team. No, there's some other things there. I recommended as well that in the meantime, the PR focus on labor history, the role of unions, the role of the Moyne Commission, government institutions of industrial relations.
Let me come back to them.
Right. So I pause there now.
Combermere Hinds, you've been very patient, and I know you have a lot to add, so I'm not going to say anything else.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. And I am very thankful for being able to follow both Kathleen and, I'm accustomed to calling Mr. Young. So, and Mr. Young. So, or I should say my comrades. And this is because you all have really freed me up just to speak by saying a lot of things that are quite foundational and preliminary about CTUSAB as well as Comrade Alleyne, about the history of CTUSAB, unionism in Barbados, and some of this history can really be extended to the region, the role of 𝘚𝑪 in really documenting a lot of this and connecting the working population of the region to development. And this is really going to take me back to the focus of today's discussion, which links CTUSAB to development. And so we've heard a lot about the history of CTUSAB, and its birth is really connected to a conundrum that the country faced in the 1990s about development. What direction should Barbados go in to ensure that it develops in the face of a global crisis at the time, a recession that affected the country and caused Barbados to seek some assistance, I'm going to use that very mild term, from the International Monetary Fund. And we have continued to see this country move from crisis to crisis with the business cycles. So around every 10 years, we will see crises occurring at the global level that reverberate across the world and have particular implications for small countries such as ours that are highly open, import dependent, and in which most of our industries, and by extension much of our employment, is heavily dependent on the fates of larger economies, the source economies for tourism, investment, and the like. So my question is kind of a macro question. What is the role of unions in this context, and by extension, what is the role of CTUSAB in addressing whatever it is we mean by development in our current day? And that is a big question as well. What do we mean by development? And it is a question that I believe unions should grapple with in addition to the day-to-day matters that Kathleen, my comrade, spoke about with regard to unions. What is it that unions need to be doing on a daily basis in terms of skills development? Mr. Young also spoke about education, but what is it that we mean by development? So when we say development and the connected jobs, forms of employment, skills, are we talking about putting every young person in Barbados to work in a hotel? All of the hotels that are springing up across the island, because if that is what development means, it certainly will have implications for representation of workers. And if it means something else, if it means that every person is supposed to be some kind of self-employed person working on a contract, even if they're working for the government, so that it makes it difficult for them to become members or to think it feasible to become an NUPW member because, again, a 9-month contract. If that is what development means, allowing this flexibility in employment for employers, including the government as an employer, what does that mean, not just for development in the country, but for unions and by extension, CTUSAB? So unions in Barbados exist within a global context. And if we look at the ways in which the social partnership, for instance, has evolved over time from 1993, it really has responded to much of this. And even the discussion about tripartite agreements and these partnerships and consensus can be framed in light of a neoliberal agenda that really became ingrained during the 1990s, where the role of labor was supposed to be far less confrontational and more in partnership with the state as well as the private sector. So in this partnership, the emphasis was on ensuring that the private sector could function, and ensuring by extension that workers are on board with getting the private sector to function, not being too disruptive, but finding a way to fit your rights in there, decent work, and so on. And this was going to help grow the economy. So working in this partnership, a partnership between government, capital, I'm going to call it, and labor. In this context, the idea that unions could or should be confrontational really became quite problematic. And if we look over time at some of the commentary that has emerged, I wrote a chapter in 2018, I wrote the name of it here, called Global Forces and the Role of Caribbean Trade Unions as Political Actors. I wrote that in 2018. And in this, along with my colleague Anita Montoot, we wrote that following the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, we tracked in newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados what persons within the private sector, including the Barbados Private Sector Association, were saying about protests led by unions, that they were disruptive to the economy, that they were threats to national development, that workers needed to find a way not to destabilize the economy. And this also framed unionism as a potential threat to development. And we see this within these sort of right-wing, I would say neoliberal, but even beyond neoliberal, the kind of hyper-rightist approaches to thinking about industry and commerce and development that view worker representation and unions as problematic for growth, for profit, and so on. So in consideration of all of this, the question is, are entities such as CTUSAB now anachronistic? Do they belong to a time that no longer exists? Do they? And are we sitting in a place where organizations like to keep themselves alive beyond their usefulness? And I think that this is a question for CTUSAB and the member associations of CTUSAB as well. And it is one that is not to be taken lightly, and that public relations and initiatives for worker education cannot replace. And it is a serious and deep discussion that I think the unions that form part of CTUSAB have to have. I want to say something else about this connection to development. The social, what we call today the social partnership, didn't initially have that name. The Protocol on Prices and Incomes Policy was the initial name, and we've had 6 of these, the last of which expired in 2013. And this really placed development within the hands, or focus and emphasis on discussions about development within the hands, as I mentioned, of capital, labor, and obviously the state. And since 2013, we have not had another one of these. I do not know what people want to think the signal is that this sends. But in April, reported in the Caribbean broadcast CBC, on April 4th, 2023, the Minister of Labor, Social Security, and the Third Sector, Colin Jordan, he noted that by May Day, 2023, 1st of May, that a new protocol would be signed. And this would mark the 30th anniversary of the signing of the first protocol in 1993. Instead, what we saw on May Day was something else being signed. We saw on May Day the signature of, electronic signature too, a 6-point declaration of missions of Barbados to take the country to 2030. This is a vision of development that exists for the country. I cannot say whether it is a vision of development that CTUSAB was party to, because when I looked at who the signatories were, I did not see CTUSAB. However, I did see at least one member of CTUSAB was a signatory, well, NUPW,
And BWU.
Barbados Workers Union, which was at that point not a member of CTUSAB, because I believe BWU left in 2013 as well. So that's 12 years without the BWU. So despite this declaration in April, we didn't have that, and we had these missions and this idea that this is a mission Barbados, and this also says to us certain things about what development means, at least for this administration, to take us through to 2030. And this notion of this mission economy follows, I guess, the authorship of Professor Mariana Mazzucato of the University College of London, who has developed this sort of mission approach that the government is very fond of. And clearly, nothing could be developed locally to address development. But that point notwithstanding, in 2024, we saw a follow-up to this, with the minister once again noting that by this May Day, now 2025, you're going to get Protocol 7. So you all will have to let me know how that is going, because it is supposed to be in collaboration with all of the social partners. So this, he announces the 29th of August, 2024, and that they would lay out a timeline for this Protocol 7. So those are some of the things that I had actually written to say today, and I wanted to reiterate one more thing, which is that a lot of the history that we have, not just of CTUSAB, but of unions in Barbados and across the region, is a very masculinist history. And it is a history of men in the leadership of unions, and this idea that workers are some kind of neutral, disembodied human beings. It does not really speak to men, women, even young people. And when I say young people, I mean people as young as 14 years old who are working, and 50, maybe part-time, 16-year-olds, really young people who are also working. This history does not tell us a lot about those who have disabilities. It does not tell us a lot about those who were involved in unions, who came from diverse backgrounds and faced very particular situations. And I think this is, if CTUSAB wants to think of its role in development, perhaps it can think of this kind of macro role in speaking to some of these issues that go beyond the day-to-day issues that its members have to deal with, these thematic areas. And the role of gender is very important because when we think about things like domestic violence and abuse, people have to get up every single day, and where they're going after they get a couple licks, they are going to work. The people that see them on a daily basis after these things occur, assaults, etc., are people in the workplace. And some of these actions also occur, some of the violence that people face occurs within the workplace. So this is one element of development that I believe unions have not focused on sufficiently. They focus a lot on economic development, the elements of development connected to the rights of workers, but not workers as people. And these are things that show up every single day in the workplace. Every day in the workplace. And we see that if we look at what happened last night when, very sadly, this young boy was killed. The teachers were at work. The teachers were at work. And the support that they're getting was the support coming from their union. So these are some of the things that really I would want, if we want to think about a very holistic approach to development, to think about. And I don't think the unions and an entity such as CTUSAB that does not have to deal with the day-to-day matters of members should shy away from some of these big picture developmental issues. And I will put another one that's very contentious on the table as well. And this also includes matters relating to sexuality that come up in the workforce, and whether or not some people like it. These are workers in Barbados that have rights that sadly the unions seem to be very silent on if said rights are infringed. So I will stop there for now because I think I've said quite a lot. I don't know if I spoke for 15 minutes, but I thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I just wouldn't like people to walk away and leave here without recognizing that unions in Barbados have been focusing on domestic violence. I can tell you as the education training officer for the 𝘬𝘍𝑚 for 7 years. 7 years we did domestic violence as part of our monthly program at the academy. We led the way in Barbados on guns and violence. We ran workshops at the 𝘬𝘍𝑚 for 3 years. I was invited through that work to go to the United Nations 3 times and speak about the challenges of small arms in Barbados. We led for 4 years training for people at front desk and connecting services. Sign language, we ran sign language programs for 4 years. We did sensitization for people with challenges and drove the program to have signage put down. So yes, we have not done enough, but I am telling you that we, trade unions, have done some work in those areas. And I can tell you that the 𝘬𝘍𝑚 in particular did quite a bit of work. We even, I trained police officers on understanding and identifying domestic violence back in the 2000s, early 2000s at their training college and at district here. They all the way to Trinidad doing programs as well. So I'm saying we did do some work, and I agree with you that we need to do more work. Only last week, I looked at the leaders, women leaders in the 𝘬𝘍𝑚 from 1920 to 1930. And I'm continuing that program from 1930 to 1940. I'm trying to do at least 15 women of that period, but I must make the point that predominantly the workforce in paid employment in Barbados was dominated by men, and that women were in really 3 areas. Domestics, until the nursing profession started to hire people of our complexion. Policewomen only became part of the force in the 1950s, and therefore, so the early history of trade unions was about men. But it has not stayed that way, and we're making an effort to bring the valuable contribution of women out in the front, because as I highlighted last week, the women that led the Barbados Union Nurses Association, some of them were working for $25 a month. One started at 12 shillings and became president of BRNA and executive members and council members, weekly council members in the public sector. The private sector unions were not as advanced as the public sector. They came a little later, but the public sector unions always led the way in widening their membership and so on. Just thought I would say that because while I know there's a long, long way to go, there has been some work done. Now we've heard from the three panelists, and we waxed from starting where we are and looking to where we go, and to imagine ourselves in the new environment with AI, new technology, building a program on social media, and not depending on big scripts and long interviews and the jar-jar that we are doing now, but to get more interactive messages out to our members. We did a history of the of the union, of the labor movement going back to Moyne, and as I said to Ellsworth, unions existed as far back as 1893, but they were all illegal. And only after the fights in 1937 to 1941 were unions allowed to strike without repercussions, and also to take money from members. And there's a little story we have to tell about both political parties and the trade union movement were brothers and sisters. And when you look back at the early membership form for the Barbados Workers Union, it carried a dividing line, industrial or political. You paid $2 to join, and if you join both, you pay the $2. You could join political or you can join industrial. And to some extent, UPW took the same tradition when it left the CSA. But that is the trade union movement in particularly Europe, very political in connections with labor. The United States of America, it was not as tightly intertwined, but there was also some political involvement. What we're finding in Barbados, and this is an ongoing piece of work, I'm following Hickman's argument that modern political aspirants have no labor connection to their lives, and that the Harvard School of Business, led by I won't call them body names from here, but anyhow, the Harvard School of Business brought a position that new management techniques, the new human resource management techniques and so on would be the way to go, and that you can forget unions. And a lot of people who graduate with their MBAs came into the workforce saying that their union was not important, it was negative. I draw attention to 𝘚𝘃𝗏𝘓𝗧 paper as far back as 1974, speaking of accommodation versus conflict. That's a 1980s, 1980s article where he was arguing that unions at that time were already becoming very accommodating to it was not as neoliberal as it was. Certainly there was a lot of social feminism in the 1970s still, but the unions were already rearing a core of collaboration. Now we've got some time to spend. What do we do to help CTUSAB fight the forces that are pulling against it? I can make one point and then I can hand it back over. Starting with you to come first, and reversing. I can make one point. That the challenges facing CTUSAB are driven by a group of spineless, unconscionable leaders in all of the trade union movements. Spineless, short of labor consciousness, and selfish in their outlooks. I leave it there. When they can challenge me on it, because they can bring the evidence. Reverse it.
Okay. I'm not sure that was a question. But what I will say is last week at the Ksville campus, we had a jobs fair, and BWU was there. And I went, because I knew that this was this week, to see if I could go and pick their brains and talk to the young people that are around there and find out what they think about unions, if they know about CTUSAB, just to see if I could get some little information to come here with. And they actually have some young people working for them, BWU, very young people, very savvy in all of the social media and how to talk to other young people as well. So it wasn't just social media, they're talking to other young people. And I knew a few of them as former students, and I asked them, working for BWU, what do you all think about CTUSAB? Should BWU rejoin CTUSAB? And their view was, no, we are doing well without them. We have been able to maintain our membership, and what we are doing now to garner interest seems to be, this new strategy is quite effective. So what is CTUSAB going to offer us in the BWU? I can't say that they are spineless or anything, and I think they do know a bit about the history of unions, because one of them said to me, young people don't want to hear about 1993. Young people who have to join the unions know 1993 is like what 1945 was to me. 1993 is ancient history. These are people who are born in 2000 and 2005 and things that are joining now. So when you talk to them about 1993, you could as well talk to them about the First World War. That's how it seems in their minds. So if we're talking about the relevance of CTUSAB and therefore what it can contribute to development, because it can only contribute to development if it is relevant, there need to be ways for this umbrella organization to resonate with younger people and the members of the various unions that form part of CTUSAB. And I think that, yes, the PR, etc., is part of it, but I think there has to be something that holds these entities together, some kind of glue beyond the historical legacy.
Reverse it.
Okay, for me, I echo similar sentiments, and I will pull out some points that I made in the presentation as well. It can't be business as usual, we all know that. What I would suggest CTUSAB to do is, I guess, go to the drawing board. Like Brother Ellsworth, he said a secretariat of persons or specialists to see how we can definitely garner that interest. I'm still going to trump communication, content of communication, and challenges. One of the major things that is on everybody's mind as it relates to the introduction of these different economies and is that big question about AI, its integration, what's not. I still think CTUSAB has a role to play, especially with those just introductions, and education is the way, not traditional education, what we're seeing now that brings results. Identifying, again, as I said in the presentation, what are our skills that we have that we don't even consider to be skills that we are ready to migrate into that economy. What is the gap? How do we bridge that gap and creating opportunities for persons not only to recognize that they do actually have foundation skills, but we can take them over the bridge to get into that space. So that is what I personally think. And that is what I think we need to focus on. The question relates to how we can tie persons together. I would have to think on that a little bit longer, to be honest, because like Brother Ellsworth said, there is freedom of association, and there's nothing like BWU took the stance. We are engaging our youth. We are creating a legacy. You see, they're doing big things on these social media. Persons are aware of the triumphs that they've been having in their disputes and what's not, and that is gaining some traction among people and the populace. So again, CTUSAB needs to be out there front-facing.
The manifesto of the Labour Party in the 2022 election contains a proposal for compulsory recognition of trade unions and collective bargaining. And I noted that because I believe strongly that trade unions would benefit more from compulsory recognition of collective bargaining and recognition and compulsory registration of agreements. Today's paper has a report that pre-Conco workers were on strike. And I remember years ago, pre-Conco reversed pay of employees, and they also, in another context, terminated bargaining with the union over concessions. And the union had to go to the department there to get a settlement on both of those occasions. pre-Conco is a powerful employer in Barbados, and there was a time when the BWU will taught them a Christian lesson. So the Barbados Workers Union, as I told Tony at the university session, there will come a time when the BWU needs the support of the unions. So my advice to CTUSAB is, if we cannot broker an agreement between BWU and CTUSAB. As a matter of fact, let me say this. When I was chairman of the IR committee on 𝘓𝑚𝑎b, we recommended that a prominent Barbadian be identified to negotiate and try to resolve differences between CTUSAB and the BWU. This is all 10 years ago, right? I'm hoping that that initiative can bear fruit, because the unions need each other. But if you understand the employment relationship, you will see that there's only one beneficiary from a fractured trade union movement: the employers. And if you think that because Miss Moore is a member of the BLP, that she's not dealing with a very astute politician, Miss Motley, she better think again. We already see the consequences of that. Miss Motley is a politician, and a politician's politician, right? And she's also, in a sense, the employer of public servants. And as a consequence of that, she sees the world through a certain lens. That's her perspective of it, right? I repeat that maybe the personalities in the workers' union may have to pass on, die, before the wisdom of coming back to the family is supported by them. And this is happening. All of us have to die, but we simply cannot have a CTUSAB of yesteryear and a CTUSAB now of bare numbers and affiliates. So maybe it may be prudent to let the situation remain as it is and let the unions suffer. I read what the acting general secretary said today. Is it Charles? The guy who is senior Dwayne Paul. I read what he said. He tried to broker to get a meeting with Mr. Bobby Maloney or somebody else. But let me say this. As Derek correctly said, we always had strikes and rebellions in slave society. It's just that unions were not legalized and they were subject to heavy penalties. The time will come when hell will break loose in this country unless there's a strong trade union movement that can restrain and control the workers. It will happen. I'm going to make this prediction. Because there were sit-down strikes in the United States before the unions were legitimized around the same time as ours. In the 1930s, the history of trade unionism the world over in capitalist countries, democracies, is replete with strike action in quest for democratic and economic rights. So I have no doubt as to what will happen here unless we sit back and negotiate an agreement for the BW to come back to the fold. If they're not interested, then we have to accept the reality of disassociation and let them sit outside the fold and exist as best they can. One last point, a study by Mr. Earl showed that Councillor Franklin had 82% support among workers, and the BW had 20-something% or something like that. And when Tony Moore was asked to comment on it, she declined. But so there may be things happening out there that the BW may not admit. I feel that we have the institutional framework for compulsory recognition of unions and compulsory resolution of disputes. I suggest that the Employment Rights Act or the tribunal be reformed to have one side dealing with private sector disputes and the other side dealing with public sector disputes. Unions can file unfair labor practices against government employers under a system of regulation. They can't do it now. So my recommendation to the union persons here is to consider the advantages of compulsory regulation of collective bargaining as a way out of the current weak situation in which they find themselves. That's my point.
Just a point that I want to draw to the panel. I am 71 years old, and 1937 will always be pivotal in my life. Every time I've gone to school, whether it was at hotel school, community college, University of West Indies, University of Warwick, University of Leicester, University of Walden, 1937 and the Carseen has always been pivotal. I'm going to bet you that 1993 it will become pivotal in the history of Barbados, because it was the first time that the partners of Barbados got together to address social, economic, political, and cultural issues. And I'm maintaining my point that the weakness of the next tier of leaders in Barbados have created a mistrust and a distrust between workers and the unions. And I've advanced the argument that while the other unions were complaining about dropping membership, a one-man union was increasing his membership by over 200% a month. That makes a statement. I rest my case. Any questions from the panel? We'll take 2 questions.
I got probably waiting to get fed, so I'm going to be very brief. I listened carefully to what Kristina and Kathleen said about young people, all right? Now, I operate in an area where I am very close to young people on a lot of WhatsApp groups, all right? And what these young people are interested in is what can be done about their pockets today. Because as Kristina mentioned, you have a macro problem back in 2018. But it's going to get worse. The American economy is floundering, and it's going to impact on Barbados because we import a lot of our goods and services from the United States. So cost of living is going to be killing us down the road. And the younger generation is saying, well, we got to look out for our finances, all right? So I spoke to a policeman, a constable, about 6 days ago, right? You know what he's doing? He is using artificial intelligence investment. He's using cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, and he can make, for an investment of $50 Barbados, between $435 US a day. And I can confirm that with $117.16 USDT, he can make $40 US a day. These are the issues that the young people are interested in. The NUPW has the chairs at the archive. You got the air conditioning. You got the internet access. You have Bay Primary School around the corner, wonderful primary school. You got the Seventh-day Adventist School up the road, right? And the young people are asking for this knowledge about how can they survive in this new economy, which I have to tell you, Derek, the older generation don't have a clue about, the politicians don't have a clue about, and with high regard for Kristina and the academics at UWI, they themselves do not understand the new economy. So I am saying the only thing you really got to do is look at partnering with civil society organizations and persons of interest like Kathleen and Kristina and the young people, and seeing how you can provide those types of services to them and make the trade unions a bit more relevant. That's my question.
Response. We had a conference here last year. The Caribbean Public Service Association had a conference here. And AI and the new technology was trashed out through the whole week. And when the conference done, it done. And suggestions were made to engage primary schools and secondary schools, and to reach into those reservoirs and to connect those young people to unions. But once the conference finished in Barbados, the AI and the new technologies and the new industries went with the conference. I swear.
As I sat and listened, I heard one of the members of the head table said he was 71.
Yes.
And all I am going to say is I'm older than him. But the point was well made that while we talk about going forward, we have to decide what planks, we are going forward on. A lot of people, to me, don't understand much about things like the IMF. You hear the IMF, but it really does not have any real strength where we are concerned. It will show its strength when we have things like 1992.
93.
Yes, but that IMF program was in 1980, and I don't think people recognize that it was in 1980 that we had an IMF program that carried us all the way down to 1992. So whoever the person was that was there then had to take the lashes from all the business and all the wrong turns that were taken before. Lesson number one: owners, from the plantation right back down to now, owners will always complain that workers are destabilizing, because by destabilizing they mean money is not going into their pockets alone. It's going into the workers' pockets. And that's where the trouble is. Until we get the fundamentals right, until we understand that that is where it is happening, then we will have the recurring decimal all the time. And so for the young people that don't want to hear and all feel that it just happened yesterday, when it happens now, and each time it's worse. So the amount of IMF things we have now, I may not be around, but certainly our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be meeting the headaches then. want to ask, I think Brother Young said that 𝘚𝘓𝘭𝘆 was a socialist?
Yes.
You said that 𝘚𝘓𝘭𝘆 was a socialist?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I will not say what I know right now. I will speak to you after about 𝘚𝘚𝘭𝘆. Barbados Workers Union has a sign, or used to have a sign, where there's no vision.
People pirate.
Okay. What I find that unions need to do of necessity, they're going to have to do, is find a way to come together. And like you said, not expect the women to bring the sandwiches and make the tea. Everybody gonna make the tea and everybody gonna make the sandwiches and everybody gonna sit down and discuss whatever the issue is that we need to go forward. But it is not going to be that the domestic issues fall within the female domain and the other issues fall within the male domain. And why do I say that? When you live in a house with a man, and the house is to be repaired or whatever, and the woman finds out the water coming through there, because the man sometimes don't realize it's the woman who points out the water is coming through there, and how are we going to pay the carpenter or the mason or whoever? So until we as union reps understand that it is two sections to it, then we will have this situation that we are having, and that is how I feel we should go forward. CTUSAB needs to get that going. We cannot worry about those who don't want to come. We have to present or project the kind of situation that people will want to join.
I think it was you, Comrade Alleyne, who made the point about Caswell Franklin Unity Workers Union. And this is what I was really getting at when I said it's not about PR. Because I can't find an Instagram post from Caswell, I can't find a meme, I can't find an infographic, I can't see him dancing on TikTok, but people are joining. So those things are nice when you want to attract attention, but the unions and the organizations have to be offering something else. And I think he appears, and I'm going to say appears, to be offering something else. I cannot say for sure if it's being delivered, but he appears to be offering something else. And I think that this is what CTUSAB has to do. It has to be offering something. And I can agree that getting together and having a discussion about what business people call the value proposition. What is the value proposition of CTUSAB? What is CTUSAB offering that is going to keep its members in and make it a worthwhile endeavor? And what can it offer to contribute to not necessarily whatever the government says is the vision of development, but what the members of CTUSAB and their unions, the union members, think development should mean for Barbados. Because the workers have to have a role in deciding what is development, not just Mazzucato and the cabinet and a consultant getting a piece of money for coming up with a strategy.
I want to echo similar sentiments when Ms. Drake got up. I was thinking, so that we're clear, our focus should be on the personableness of people. I remember I mentioned in my presentation about the pain point, understanding what the pain points of our persons are, and yes, use the social media, but cater to them. What I find about the population of persons now, they're all searching. We are all searching. So I'm not separating myself from it. We are all searching. We are all trying to figure out where we fit in this big space, this big universe. And if we can really help them to fill those gaps, bridge those gaps. I think that that's a step in the right direction. I do agree with Dr. Hinds in terms of really defining what that development looks like. When she said that, a light bulb went off in my head when she made her presentation. Really, what does development look like in the eyes of the working population, and then how can CTUSAB position itself to meet that pain point to take us forward?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I had no intentions of making any comment at this point, but I'm propelled to do so. I think it's important that there's an understanding of what the Congress is doing. I don't believe that the panelists are really in tune totally with all that the Congress is doing. Suffice it to say that the intention is to make itself relevant. But it has to make itself relevant to the audience or the target group, so to speak, that is now part of the youth generation. The point is that we have placed a lot of emphasis on building out a PR strategy, which I'm hoping that will come to life, that targets that group. I don't believe it is for the wine and dine, and as we see on some other media. We are trying to get in people's minds, to get them to understand the importance of unionism and to see how the role of unions in helping them in their own development. Clearly that's going to take some time, because as we are saying that we are all marching in the same tune. We are singing a similar song, but not to the same tune. I believe that part of what, and I'm going to say it, although I know that I might get a lot of little knocks for it, but the truth is the truth. The failing that we have lies within the membership of CTUSAB. CTUSAB has put in place a Young Workers Committee. That committee, in its first, it's in the embryonic stages, put out a number of the young persons who have risen to the height of the leadership of the current labor movement. For some unknown reason, those persons seem not to understand what it means to pass the baton and encouraging other people to step up the plate. Their statement about the selfishness, I'm going to leave it there, but somehow it has some weight. We have to take responsibility collectively, because if we are prepared, because I cannot in this day and age, this is now going 3 years, that CTUSAB has been trying to get young workers on a committee, and none of our member units, none of them can bring one name to have a functioning committee. Now, if that is part of what happens in the internal, then you can't blame an organization by leadership. I'm not taking this in the point that you're blaming leadership for what is not happening. Our members got to step up to the plate. They have to recognize that the leadership of the trade union movement is grounded in their preparing the way for others to come up. We all can't, look, I don't believe in the monopoly thing, and I don't believe no one-man show. But the only way they can grow and develop is by embracing and empowering and engaging other people. And we have to do that. It's a must. Whether you are in whatever position you are, you must be able to groom someone to take over the leadership. And the problem in CTUSAB is that there is, it's not a problem, I shouldn't rephrase that, there's no problem in terms of opportunity, because it's what? A free realm, democracy. I can't tell anybody who to vote for who, but you can't have a situation where you don't have people who are offering themselves. But you got to prepare them first. And that's the problem that we have. People want to get to the top, but don't want to climb the ladder. So when you do that, what are you going to do to the organization? You're going to destroy it. And we have to take this a different approach, as you are all saying. We have a lot of ideas, and I'm saying that a lot of what I've heard this evening, according to what's happening now. It's not happening at the pace that we will want it, but it can't happen because we don't have the resources to drive it. We don't have the interest to drive it. I'll make a comment by looking around in this audience this evening. But you can look and you judge for yourself. I can leave you to judge for yourself. I'm not going to go beyond that. So if you're going to sit down and say, all these things, oh yes, we're going to ask ourselves the fundamental question, what are we doing about it? Development comes by input. And that input has to be meaningful. It has to be constructive. But if all of us are going to sit on the fringes and watch from the gallery, then where are we going? I don't want to go beyond this because I know that I can say a lot more that I would not want to say. Because you know when you tell the truth, you know people get vexed. But I want to say one thing. I agree that we have to engage the youth. But I also want to say, outside of that, we have to take a positive step. Reorganize ourselves. They say all thing about the Barbados Workers Union and whether it has left or whether UPW leaves, to me is irrelevant. A man's choice, if he wants to go, he goes. But I don't understand, and when we are speaking, and I personally get very upset when my colleagues sit down and sing the song Solidarity Forever, Unity Makes Us Strong, and then do and behave in ways that are not consistent with that. That is something I do not understand, how we can do that to ourselves. We are saying, that's why young people are not coming. They're seeing, they're listening, they're watching, and they're saying, them cannot be serious. Can't be serious. So, Brother Man, I know you want me to go to say that, but I'm going to say this one last thing.
You say one more last.
One last thing. Because I got to say it like Brother Young. At the end of the day, CTUSAB belongs to no individual. It's a collective, and we must understand that we all have a part to play. And if we are not prepared to do what is right and to make our input in a meaningful way, then we are going to be part of the death knell of an organization. And I said, as far as the Barbados Working Union is concerned, let me say to you that there have been many attempts. I remember the last emissary, if I recall correct, was the late Canon, what's his name again? Canon Marshall. That he was the one who was charged. There were other persons. I also believe that, if my memory serves me correct, Sir Keith was also a part of that. There were several other persons who went to try to get the Barbados Workers Union to understand that the whole thing about togetherness, solidarity means something. But you said where there's no vision, the people perish.
I want to say that we've been having a very open discussion. The best language in the world, Bajan, mixed with English. And it was very, very enlightening. You may have taken some very sharp notes, which I will share with Brother 𝘠𝘶. And you say you want some social media and CBC and newsletter, everything, to at least put a little report out so that we are. And I hope that we will come back in another 6 weeks or so and do another session on after the discussion what? 𝘠𝘶, after the start what?
Let's see. I've been sitting there and I've been taking some notes all night, you know, and I want to say that I want to make a few remarks in closing. That I've listened to the panelists, I've listened to the few questions from the floor, and I must agree that many of the concerns voiced, many of the issues that we have put out there, I must agree that CTUSAB, you know, has been addressing, have noticed the need to tackle these particular issues. Hence, the reason for this particular sensitization session, because we wanted to hear, we wanted to measure, we wanted to confirm what we were thinking as a membership, what we were thinking as an organization who, for some reason, believe that has become irrelevant in our society. We have been able to look at the whole concern of youth involvement. Only yesterday, I sat in a meeting with the GS, and we were discussing this particular topic because it would have came out of a think tank session that we had recently with the last Friday with the eminent group and some other members. The conversation even came up sometime last year, October, November, when we would have had our strategic planning meeting sessions. And we also looked at the importance of social media, the types of media that engage the minds of young people, and how we could fashion what we put out there in order to be able to get the message across to young people. And suffice to say, and I heard the General Secretary spoke, you know, and I've heard someone mention that we are creatures of our membership. And I agree. I do agree. Because, I'm going to be very careful with this. You know, I've been around for a very long time too. And I've seen the Congress move, not as long as Claudette, but I've seen the Congress move in this direction, merely because of personal grosses and attachment to destructive elements, destroying an organization that does not belong to me, or does not only carry a vision of any leadership, but a shared vision through its membership. And if you see an organization in a state like what you have just described or heard about today, if you see an organization in that state, then tell me, what does the problem appear to be to you? You don't have to answer, because we all know. We've seen the self-removal of Barbados Workers Union and the BSTU, but we've seen them emerge in a different setting, representing their own. That ought to be a concern when we look at what the purpose of the coalition, when we look at the purpose of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associates, what it was about. It tells me clearly what I've just said before, the elements of distractions. It tells me that people do not have the interest. There are some people, in fact, who do not have the interest of the organization at heart. And I am tired of hearing CTUSAB really standing up in public and saying, but look at me, you know, and this is what we stand for. But when we ask member units to join the fights, toe the line, people buckle, and people disappear and go into their own quarters and have their own conversations and drink tea. I'm saying that we as a body, I'm saying that we as an organization, with members understanding that we are representing membership and not ourselves, needs to change the way we do business. and understand that being part of an organization like this does not or should not actually be what you as an individual think, but because of the concerns of the wider membership, should be the center of your purpose. We've also been engaging the public through social media. Only recently, I heard a student talking to me, a student who came to me actually, a young person, 18 years old, and he wanted to know more about CTUSAB. I recall having a conversation with the PR about a week or two ago in terms of looking at a plan for secondary schools, looking at the World of Work program, and using it as a catalyst to help to involve and to educate young people on unionism and what unions mean to them. You know, so these are things that we have not ignored, and these are things that we will continue to work with as we go forward. I agree also that this whole idea of discord and individualism is something that, I mean, among us, right, is something that has to be addressed. We are addressing it. It has not gone unnoticed. And this did not just happen overnight. These things were here long before, and they will continue to be there. But it does not mean that CTUSAB, though within, you know, that it is not, or whoever is sitting at the table of CTUSAB is not serving the purpose for the movement to go forward. So these are just my points. And one other thing in terms of addressing violence, gender-based concerns, and other offenses, CTUSAB has never shied away from this position. We have known that we have put things out there with regards to violence, not only in the workplace, violence within our communities, as we see now, but it is a concern, and I believe that, you know, I like the suggestion from Dr. Hinds with regards of, you know, apart from the union issues, look at the big ticket issues, the other concerns in terms of social development and so on, you know, that we can tap into. We can tap into to help move Barbados forward, not only the union as a union or for the interest of unionism, but in order to help to sustain and to help support social development. You know, we must be also be seen in that light. All right? I just want to thank each and every one of you for coming out, the media, the heads of unions, and all of you panelists, and the moderator. I just want to thank you for coming out this evening to join with us in support of this first sensitization lecture or panel discussion for the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Association. I know that there will be many more like this during, yes, first for the year. There'll be many more like this during the course of the year, and, you know, intentionally put on by the Congress in order to get feedback, to be able to measure what we're doing.
Hey, listen up, listen up. Listen up. National Trade Union Center, working for the good of all. National Trade Union Center, don't worry, you know we got control. We working with